I bet you've never made gingerbread cookies as bold and festive as these red gingerbread cookies. Wait until you see the secret ingredient. I start with 3 cups of all-purpose flour. This is the foundation of our dough, giving it the structure we need for those perfect cutout shapes. Next, I add 3/4 teaspoon of baking soda. This gives the cookies just the right lift, so they bake up soft but sturdy. Then I add 1/2 teaspoon of salt. A small amount goes a long way in balancing the sweetness and enhancing all the flavors. Now for the spices, this is where the holiday magic happens. I start with 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon to bring warmth and coziness to every bite. Next, I add 1 teaspoon of ground ginger for a bit of festive zing that elevates the flavor profile. Then there's 3/4 teaspoon of ground cloves, which adds a rich, spicy depth. Finally, I mix in 1/2 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, rounding out the aroma and creating that unmistakable holiday scent that fills the kitchen with cheer. I whisk the dry ingredients to blend spices and baking soda, guaranteeing perfect flavor. For a smoother texture, sifting works wonders. Once combined, I set the bowl aside. Now for the wet ingredients. In a medium-sized bowl, I start with 1 large egg. Making sure it's at room temperature ensures the dough blends more smoothly and improves its overall structure and texture. Next, I add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. This ingredient brings warmth and depth to the dough, tying all the flavors together in every bite. Finally, I pour in 1/2 cup of maple syrup. Its caramel-like sweetness and festive amber hue add an extra dose of holiday cheer. As a quick note, I'm preparing a double batch in this video to keep up with my holiday baking frenzy. However, the recipe measurements listed here are for a single batch, making it easier for you to adjust as needed. Each batch has its own charm, so feel free to double up if you're in the holiday spirit and want extra cookies for gifting or indulging. For healthier substitutions or ingredient tips, don't forget to visit my blog post linked in the description. I use a hand whisk to thoroughly mix the wet ingredients first. Whisking by hand not only combines everything evenly, but also lets me keep an eye on the consistency to ensure it's just right. If you don't have a whisk handy, a sturdy fork works just as well in a pinch. Here's where the magic happens. I whisk the red food coloring into the wet ingredients at the perfect stage, right at the end. This ensures the color blends seamlessly without overmixing the dough later. For a soft pink tone, I use 1 teaspoon of coloring. For a bold festive red, 2 teaspoons does the trick. And if you're craving an even richer hue, feel free to add a bit more. After all, holiday cookies are all about making a statement. Incorporating the dye into the wet mixture this stage not only keeps the process smooth, but also prevents those pesky streaks in the final dough. Whisking in the food coloring feels a bit like stepping into art class again, but this time, my creation is deliciously edible. I grab my trusty hand whisk and start blending, mixing with purpose, but keeping the mood light and fun. If you don't have a whisk handy, no worries. A sturdy fork works just as well. Just channel your inner artist and give it some enthusiastic wrist action. As I mix, I make sure to scrape down the sides of the bowl to ensure every drop of liquid takes on that vibrant, festive hue. If I feel like the red could be a little deeper, I don't hold back. I add a bit more food coloring without hesitation. More color equals more holiday cheer, right? By the time I'm done, the mixture is a stunning smooth red, perfectly ready for the next step. Honestly, it's so beautiful, I almost want to pause and admire it, but not for too long. With the wet ingredients perfectly prepped, I set the bowl aside, ready to move on and turn this colorful masterpiece into delicious cookies. Next up, creaming the butter and sugar, a crucial step for achieving that perfect cookie dough consistency. For this task, I turn to my KitchenAid 7-quart stand mixer. And here's why. It's a powerhouse when handling thicker doughs, especially during my holiday bake-in frenzy when I'm doubling recipes. Its large capacity saves both the mixer and me from overworking, keeping the process smooth and effortless. To start, I add 3/4 of a cup of unsalted butter, softened to room temperature, into the mixing bowl. Softened butter is essential. It blends seamlessly and helps create a smooth, fluffy texture. If you're not sure how to get your butter perfectly softened without melting it, head over to my blog post, where I share 3 foolproof ways to soften butter. A total game changer for recipes like this. Next, I add 1/2 cup of packed brown sugar. This ingredient brings a subtle molasses-like sweetness that enhances the cookies' flavor while also keeping them soft and tender. Together, these 2 ingredients are the foundation for a buttery, melt-in-your-mouth cookie. Using the paddle attachment, I start the mixer on low speed to avoid a sugar cloud, then gradually increase to medium. I let it cream for about 2 to 3 minutes until the mixture is light and fluffy. This step is non-negotiable. It's what gives the cookies their tender, buttery texture. About halfway through, I pause to scrape down the sides of the bowl with a silicone spatula. This ensures every last bit of butter and sugar is fully incorporated. Trust me, taking this small extra step makes a world of difference when it comes to achieving perfectly balanced dough. Next, I pour in the wet ingredients, the egg, maple syrup, vanilla, and food coloring mixture. I start mixing on low speed to keep everything under control, then gradually increase to medium. This ensures the ingredients blend smoothly without any splashes or messes. In just a minute or so, the mixture transforms into a beautifully combined and vibrant base, ready to take on the dry ingredients. Now, it's time to bring in the dry ingredients, and this is where everything starts coming together. I add the dry mixture gradually, about 1/3 at a time, while keeping the mixer on low speed. This slow addition is key. It prevents a flour explosion. Trust me, I've had my share of flour-covered counters and ensures the dough comes together evenly without overworking it. Keeping the speed on low is important here. The mixer will eventually do its work and incorporate everything beautifully. With thick dough like this, increasing the speed can put unnecessary strain on the mixer, and you definitely don't want to risk burning out the motor, especially during holiday baking season. Now, if you don't have a standalone electric mixer, don't worry. You can still make this dough, but it might take a little elbow grease. Start by incorporating the flour into the wet ingredients with a sturdy wooden spoon. Once it starts to come together, you can switch to mixing it with your hands. But fair warning, in my humble opinion, you probably won't want to tackle more than one batch this way, unless you're looking for a full upper body workout. Trust me, your arms will thank you for investing in a mixer someday. As the dough begins to thicken, I keep a close eye on the texture. The goal is a dough that holds together without being sticky or crumbly. If it feels a little too sticky, I add a tablespoon of flour at a time, letting it mix in completely before deciding if it needs more. On the flip side, if it feels too dry or crumbly, a small splash of milk can do wonders to bring it back to the perfect consistency. I like to stop the mixer occasionally to scrape down the sides of the bowl with a silicone spatula. This ensures every bit of flour and spice gets incorporated evenly into the dough. By the end, the dough should be firm yet pliable, easy to work with, and ready to roll out after chilling. This is the moment where I know the magic is about to happen, because a well-prepped dough is the secret to cookies that roll, cut, and bake like a dream. Once the dough is perfectly mixed and ready to chill, there's one last thing to tackle, the paddle attachment. It's like a magnet for every last bit of dough. And let's be honest, leaving any behind feels like a crime against cookies. I grab my trusty silicone spatula and start by scraping off the bulk of the dough stuck to the paddle. I like to work from the edges inward, making sure I don't miss any of those stubborn spots in the crevices. For the final touch, I run the spatula along the flat side of the paddle to get every last smidge. If you're feeling extra indulgent, this is the perfect time for a little taste test, because quality control is a baker's prerogative. I lay out a large piece of food wrap on the table and scoop the dough onto it using a silicone spatula. Instead of shaping it into discs right away, I loosely wrap the dough first. Once it's partially enclosed, I press and shape it into a flat disc. This method keeps my hands clean and lets me move through the process more quickly. Of course, if you prefer to shape the dough into discs before wrapping, feel free to do so. This is just my personal preference. Depending on the size of your batch, you'll end up with 2 to 3 discs ready for chilling. This next step is non-negotiable. Into the refrigerator it goes for at least 1 hour. Chilling is a game changer. It firms up the dough, making it easier to handle and roll, while also helping the cookies hold their beautiful shapes during baking. Trust me, you don't want your festive cutouts turning into unrecognizable blobs in the oven. This simple step is the secret to picture-perfect cookies that are as easy to work with as they are delicious. If you're not planning to bake right away, you can also freeze the dough at this stage. To freeze, wrap each disc tightly in an additional layer of plastic wrap or aluminum foil to protect it from freezer burn. For extra convenience, I like to pop the wrapped discs into a freezer-safe zip-top bag and label them with the date and the type of dough. Trust me, this saves a lot of guesswork later. The dough can be frozen for up to 3 months. When you're ready to bake, simply thaw the discs overnight in the refrigerator and they'll be good to go. Personally, I never make cookies in one day. This is how I survive the holidays. I spread the process out over several days. One day is dedicated to making and chilling the dough, another to rolling, cutting, and baking the cookies, and finally a day, or even two, for decorating. It keeps things manageable, ensures the cookies turn out perfectly, and allows me to actually enjoy the process. After all, holiday baking should be festive, not stressful. By breaking it up, I can give each step the attention it deserves without feeling overwhelmed. Plus, it leaves me with enough energy to experiment with creative designs or try new decorating techniques. The best part? It turns holiday baking into a series of fun traditions rather than a rushed marathon. My family loves getting involved, especially on decorating day. It's a great way to make memories and share laughs while creating something beautiful and delicious. I hope you're enjoying making this vibrant red gingerbread cookie dough as much as I do. If this recipe has you feeling inspired, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell so you'll always be in the loop for more holiday baking magic. Do you have a favorite gingerbread recipe that's a must-have in your holiday traditions? Maybe a family recipe passed down for generations, or a creative twist you've discovered? I'd love for you to share it in the comments below. Let's exchange ideas and keep the holiday baking spirit alive. On my channel, I combine my love for food photography and baking to bring you recipes that are as beautiful as they are delicious. I want you to feel like you're right here in my kitchen, making festive memories with me. From perfectly shaped cookies to creative flavored twists, I'm here to help you bake something amazing. Thanks for hanging out with me on this holiday adventure. Now, let's get those cookies baked and decorated to wow everyone this season. All right, let's get this red gingerbread dough ready. I take the disc out of the fridge and let it chill, but not too much, on the counter for about 10 minutes. Trust me, this step is everything. If it's too cold, rolling it out feels like arm wrestling a brick. Not exactly festive. Too warm, and it turns into a sticky situation nobody wants. Before I get rolling, both literally and figuratively, I like to make sure I've got everything I need within arm's reach. Trust me, there's nothing worse than getting halfway through and realizing you're missing something. Here's my go-to lineup. My trusty adjustable rolling pin for perfectly even cookies every time. Parchment paper or a silicone mat, because who wants dough sticking everywhere? Not me. A solid baking sheet. Gotta have a sturdy base for all our masterpieces. Vinyl gloves, totally optional, but they're a lifesaver if you want to keep your hands clean and dough-free. Cookie cutters. This is where the fun really starts. I always have my favorite festive shapes ready to go. A cake spatula, essential for lifting those delicate cookies without losing their shape. A dredge for sprinkling flour, optional but one of my must-haves for baking. It's a game changer for lightly dusting the surface without overdoing it. Now that we're all set, it's time to roll up our sleeves and dive in. And hey, if some of these tools are new to you, no worries. I've linked them all in the description below to make it easy. I start by sprinkling a light layer of flour over the counter. It's my go-to trick to keep the dough from sticking. Personally, I like to throw on a pair of disposable vinyl gloves for this step. They're such a game changer when handling sticky dough, and cleanup is a breeze. But hey, if you're the kind of baker who loves getting your hands a little flowery, go for it. Embrace the mess. Once that's done, I plop my unwrapped dough disc onto the floured surface, and just like that, we're ready to roll. I grab my trusty adjustable rolling pin and roll the dough to a perfect 1/4 inch thickness. The red color really pops, so festive and fun. The adjustable pin ensures even cookies, so no crispy edges or doughy centers to worry about. If your dough starts sticking to the pin, don't panic. Sprinkle a tiny bit of flour on top or lightly dust the rolling pin. Here's another way to roll out your dough mess-free. Sandwich it between 2 sheets of parchment paper. No flour dusted all over the counter, no sticky mess, and cleanup is as simple as tossing the parchment. Plus, it keeps the dough smooth and easy to handle. Perfect for stress-free holiday baking. Time to grab my cookie cutters and start stamping out some festive shapes. For these red gingerbread cookies, I'm keeping it simple and classic with a Christmas tree cutter. It's always a favorite in my house. A little tip from me: stick to cutting similar sized shapes for each baking sheet. This way, all the cookies bake evenly, and you won't end up with some overbaked or underdone. Trust me, it makes a big difference. Once all the dough is cut into cookies, I carefully pull away the extra dough from around the shapes. Don't even think about tossing it. This dough is reusable gold. I always save it for the next round of rolling and cutting. Here's a handy tip from me. Gather the scraps, form them into a ball, and loosely cover it with food wrap. This keeps the dough from drying out while you're busy transferring cookies to the baking sheet. I grab my baking sheet and line it with parchment paper. Pre-cut sheets are my go-to. They save so much time, but a roll works perfectly fine too. I carefully use a cake spatula to lift each cookie off the counter and onto the parchment-lined baking sheet. This little tool, game changer. It keeps the shapes intact and saves me from accidentally squishing or stretching them. Trust me, nothing's worse than a Christmas tree that looks like it melted. If you don't have a cake spatula, no worries. A thin, flat pancake spatula or even a large butter knife can do the trick in a pinch. Just be gentle. I always make sure to space the cookies about 1 inch apart on the sheet. This gives them enough room to bake evenly and allows proper airflow. It's a small detail, but it makes a big difference. When I'm done cutting out the cookies, I gather up the dough scraps and press them back into a disc. Then I roll it out again to cut even more cookies. No wasting a single bit of that vibrant red dough. If the dough starts to get too soft after a couple of rounds, here's a quick fix. Pop it back into the fridge for about 10 minutes to firm it up. It'll make rolling and cutting so much easier. I keep going until every last scrap is transformed into festive little cookies. Waste not, want not, especially with something this delicious. This year, I'm shaking things up in the kitchen. Instead of sticking to my usual gingerbread cookie routine, I've decided to experiment with not 1, not 2, but multiple gingerbread flavors. And here's my secret. To keep track of all the delicious variations, I'm baking each flavor in a single cookie cutter shape. It's like my little flavor coding system, so when it's time to share or sneak a taste, I'll know exactly which cookie is which. If you want to try something new with your gingerbread this holiday season, head over to my gingerbread playlist. I've got recipes for every flavor mood, from warm and spice to citrusy and bright. My personal favorite? The orange zest gingerbread. It's tangy and festive. But some of my friends swear by the spiced gingerbread for that classic holiday flavor. What about you? Let me know which flavor is your favorite. If you are baking cookies to gift this holiday season, don't forget that how you package them can make all the difference. In my video on how to package homemade cookies for gifting, I'll show you simple and creative ways to make your treats look as amazing as they taste. From festive wrapping ideas to adding personal touches like ribbons and tags, you'll find everything you need to make your homemade gifts extra special. Be sure to check it out and get inspired for your holiday baking. Here's my top secret trick. Don't tell anyone. Before baking, I always sneak the baking sheet into the fridge for about 10 minutes. Why, you ask? Well, here's the science. Chilling the dough firms up the butter in the cookies, which slows down how quickly it melts in the oven. This gives the cookie structure a chance to set before spreading, keeping those shapes crisp and perfect. And here's the key. Straight from the fridge, they go right into the fully preheated oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's right. Make sure your oven has reached its ideal temperature before those cookies go in. No delays, no detours, just perfectly shaped cookies every single time. Now you not only know the secret, but also the science behind it. Talk about being a baking pro. All right, it's oven time. I grab my chilled baking sheet and place it right on the middle rack of my fully preheated oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the sweet spot for even baking. I bake the cookies for about 8 to 10 minutes, keeping a close watch. The edges should look just set, while the centers will still be soft. Don't worry, they'll firm up as they cool. Here's a little insider tip from me. If you've ever battled with burned cookies, haven't we all? Start with the minimum baking time, 8 minutes here, and check on them. Your altitude above sea level plays a big role in baking, so adjust as needed. If the cookies need extra time, give them another minute. For me, baking at high altitude, 9 minutes hits the sweet spot every time. Soft centers, perfectly set edges, and no burnt bottoms in sight. Baking isn't just about creating delicious treats. It's also about keeping your space clean and ready for the next batch of fun. While the cookies are baking, and maybe another batch is chilling, it's the perfect time to tidy up the counter. Here's my quick method. I grab my trusty dough cutter and scrape up all the flour and bits of dough from the surface. It's amazing how much easier this makes cleanup. Once I've gathered the mess into a neat little pile to toss, I wipe the counter clean with a damp cloth. It's oddly satisfying, and it leaves me with a fresh workspace ready for the next round of holiday baking chaos. When the cookies come out of the oven, I let them rest on the baking sheet for about 5 minutes. This little pause gives them time to set and firm up before I move them. Then I carefully transfer them to a cooling rack to cool completely. Trust me, this step is non-negotiable if you're planning to decorate them. Warm cookies and icing, total meltdown. But if you don't have a cooling rack, no worries. You can lay the cookies out on a clean sheet of parchment paper or a kitchen towel. Just make sure they have enough space to cool evenly and don't stack them, or you'll end up with steam-softened cookies. I usually rely on my trusty cake spatula to transfer freshly baked cookies to the cooling rack because they're still soft and way too hot to handle. But since I've been filming today, the cookies have had extra time to cool right on the baking sheet. They've firmed up enough that I can just pick them up with my hands, something I don't typically recommend unless you're in a similar situation. Normally, trying this would leave you juggling a too soft cookie and potentially burning your fingers. Now for the fun part, decorating. I love using royal icing to add some extra flair to my cookies. If you want to learn how to make the perfect royal icing, be sure to catch my next video, where I'll share all my tips and tricks. But honestly, these red gingerbread cookies are so beautiful on their own, they don't really need much dressing up. They're bold, festive, and make fantastic gifts. I mean, who wouldn't love opening a box of these vibrant holiday treats? And there you have it, red gingerbread cookies that bring a colorful twist to the holiday season. Whether you're baking for family, friends, or just yourself, these cookies are sure to spread festive cheer. If you want more gingerbread inspiration, check out my gingerbread cookie dough playlist for all kinds of creative variations. Thanks for baking with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.